Hey everybody, it is October, the month of Halloween, so I'm going to be doing maybe a few Halloween-themed movies or horror films. So today I'm doing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and this is the original 1974 version, and it was directed by Tobe Hooper. Hooper is clearly an auteur filmmaker, but for one reason or another, he just never quite broke through into the mainstream in terms of Hollywood recognition. And this film was kind of his one big success. But I mean, I would say that it's a pretty good legacy. If you're going to have one success story, I think this is the one, because this film is obviously a classic for the horror genre, and it definitely contributed to the birth of the slasher genre as well. This was made on a very low budget with mainly just local Texas actors that were relatively unknown, and it was just kind of one of those things where everything just fell in place for this particular production. I think part of it is just that the time in which it was released, it just came out at a time where it spoke to people because it was so unrelenting and brutal compared to the horror films that they had seen up to that point. It was just a different world when this movie came out in the early 70s. I mean, it was at the very tail end of the Vietnam War, and so this kind of grotesque, kind of barbaric view of the world just sort of touched a nerve. The premise is quite simple. Most slasher movies do have very simple plots, and it's a very concise film, which I actually appreciate. It's about this girl named Sally and her paraplegic brother named Franklin, and then a smattering of other expendable 20-something-year-olds. Sally and Franklin want to go on this road trip to go back to visit their grandfather's grave. The house close to where they grew up is inhabited by a bunch of cannibals who eventually attack them, and it becomes this big cat and mouse sort of chase film. Before preparing for this review, I hadn't seen this film in maybe 10 years. I mean, I was probably a teenager the last time that I saw it. And I remember thinking at the time that it was very well made. I mean, honestly, the cinematography and just the tone of everything is on point. I really think that deserves to be discussed and admired. But I felt ultimately that it was hollow and somewhat gratuitous. But returning to it now, I actually think it's a lot better than I remember. It has a lot more going for it than what you see at first glance. I mean, it is a slasher film, but it's also a commentary. It has a lot of subliminal messages, and they're not even really that subliminal because they're right at the surface a lot of the time. It's making a commentary on slaughterhouses, on animal cruelty, on capitalism, and how all of that relates to humans, hence, you know, the cannibalism. So yeah, being more mature and more aware of these things, I realized that this is some like Upton Sinclair kind of shit, and it's really fun to examine. There are a lot of visual metaphors and lines of dialogue that really allude to this idea. At the beginning of the film, all of the characters are in that van, and they're headed towards the gravesite, and they're talking about slaughterhouses. They're talking about the treatment of animals, how they are slaughtered mercilessly for our own consumption. And, you know, one of the characters says, I like meat. I don't want to know about this kind of stuff because we'd rather be oblivious to that sort of information so we can just enjoy our steaks and our sausages and our chicken. But of course, later in the film, it's the humans that are the ones that are slaughtered mercilessly, like the animals that they eat, so that they can be part of a meal for the actual cannibals. This is a film that really takes the gloves off and just strips everything down to the bare minimum, which I think is very crucial, because you can feel the grit, you can feel that sense of primality where the animals that they're discussing and the humans themselves are quite almost interchangeable. When the humans are killed, it is with such great quickness and aggression and cruelty. And Leatherface, you know, who's the main antagonist, is very much like a wild beast. He never speaks. He just makes a lot of kind of grunts and noises. And he just moves around in this very strange way while he just hacks people up. There are a lot of stylistic choices that I think work really well, where it contributes to the blurring of those lines between the humans and then the rest of the animals. Like, for instance, when Sally is captured and she's screaming, you can hear kind of non-diegetic noises of pigs, and it's almost as if you can't tell whether or not it's the pig screaming or if it's her. One thing that I noticed watching the first act of the film is just how similar the character of Franklin and the hitchhiker are. They have a lot of similar body language. They have a kind of awkwardness to them, which is very clear. And the other characters kind of resent them and kind of lump them in together. They both talk about the same things when it comes to the slaughtering of animals. And I just think that these two characters are kind of the subconscious bridge between the protagonists and the antagonists, like the group of young people and the cannibals. They provide that blurred line between the civility and the curiosity towards those primitive instincts. And I don't think that this film is that gratuitous, actually. I think this film uses the idea of brutality to reflect a sense of capitalism. As I mentioned at the beginning of the review, they're making a profit off of killing people and then turning them into barbecue for the consumption, for other people to purchase and consume. And of course, we do this with the meat of other animals. And so there's really just a sense of a fundamental core of violence to all of us. And this film really doesn't waste any time plunging into that very off-putting, very grisly territory, even just with the opening images of the corpses and just those real shrill sound effects that you hear throughout the movie. And I gotta hand it to Cooper. I think that he has a great eye for details and a great ear as well. I really like the cinematography in this. It's kind of a contrast because it's grainy and it has a sort of handheld quality to it, but at other times it's very controlled. In particular, when you're watching some of the characters walk into the House of Cannibals for the first time, it's that there's a real low angle behind them and it's just kind of very controlled on a dolly. And it's a simple idea, but very effective. There's also a real musical quality to it, I think. It's like you might see this in a music video from the 90s from somebody like Marilyn Manson. There's one part where Leatherface is chasing Sally. She goes upstairs into the house and he's trying to saw the door down, and it cuts between him and her seeing all of these corpses and just it has a rhythmic quality to it with the sounds and just the cutting. He just has a way of being able to break through into those unsettling ideas. Of course, one of the most famous images in the film is the extreme close-up of Sally's eyes, where you can see all the little capillaries, and it's just, it's really badass, but really grotesque. And that's probably one of the most uncomfortable dinner scenes in movies for sure. But I gotta say, just looking at the film as a whole, and obviously that scene as well, just the way that everything is depicted, it never feels dated. The only thing that to me feels really dated about this movie is the acting. But other than that, everything else just, I don't know, it's got a quality that is very tasteful, and it's never really over the top. I think this film's actually quite similar to Psycho in many ways. It's got a lot of the same ideas. You've got a creepy guys living in a creepy house, and they're preserving all of these corpses. It's like Hitchcock is passing on the torch to the next generation of horror directors. I think though, in terms of if I'm separating the film into like the first half and the second half to me isn't quite as strong. I think it just kind of goes on a little bit too much, sort of drags for me. But honestly, I gotta say I was pleasantly surprised revisiting this film, and I think there's more to this film to admire. And so I think that, if you haven't seen the original, you should definitely revisit it. It's interesting. And that's my review. Thank you all for listening. If you want to check out my social media information, it's below. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.